Is Skynet right around the corner? Or is AI going to solve all of our toughest problems? On this episode, we talk about technologies that are going to disrupt business in 2023, including AI, cloud security, and marketing algorithms. We have a special guest on today's show as our producer Norman Omuse switches to the other side of the camera to join us for today's discussion. Norman talks about where cloud technologies are now and potential downsides, including security threats that happen today, as well as potential long-term implications. Otis, Norman, and I discuss the trade-off that we all face when we make our choice around new technologies, including how people adopt new technologies because it makes their life better in some way. But as that improvement becomes more standard, we tend to start focusing on the negative implications of that technology. We also touch on the irony of our perception around marketing algorithms. We love them when they advertise the right things, but we hate them as soon as we see an ad for something we don't want. So is Big Brother real, or is the real enemy the internal bias that materializes inside of the algorithms and AI? Are sentient AI bringing doomsday in 2023? And how does the generational perspective around the Soviets' nuclear war tie into the discussions around AI? Norman, Otis, and I dive into all of this and much more in today's great episode. Quick reminder to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. You can also find the full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And if you learned something from Norman, Otis, or me in our conversation, make sure to share this episode with someone else so they can learn it too. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. The transition from college to that first career is a difficult one, and it's even harder when you lose your sense of identity. If you're an athlete who just hung up the cleats, it's hard to go from being a rugby player to being Joe in accounting. We created Next is Best to help retired college athletes use their skills to create an impact through entrepreneurship. Next is Best by Know Your Tribe will help to smoothen that rough transition by helping you establish a clear sense of purpose, an actionable path to success, and the tools you need to manage your life. Your 20s are a confusing and chaotic time. Next is Best gives you the tools you need to make sense of the chaos and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. You can learn more about Next is Best by Know Your Tribe at findyourpurpose.coach. Now here's Cam and Otis with the show.
Hey, welcome to Cam and Otis Show. Something's a little bit different, ain't it? You know, those of you watching on YouTube, blatantly obvious, out there in podcast land, you may not pick it up until we start talking, but there's a couple of things a little bit different. One, I'm not in my normal studio. Two, Camden's not in his normal studio. Three, our producers got lost and ended up on this side of the camera, Norman, and we're all in the same place, which is, wow, I lost count. What was that, 4, 5? Five things.
Five's a good number.
5. We'll stick with 5 because then I don't have to use my other hand. A special show today to have Norman on this side of the camera. We'll call it a little bit of a holiday show.
Yeah.
Maybe a Christmas show, maybe a New Year's show, or just a holiday, whichever one you want to call it. But we're going to have a lot of fun because we wanted to squeeze some tech stuff out of Norman to share with you all as you're stepping out in the new year and what's going to happen, how you're going to, you know, because what do we all do? What does everybody do in December? They start thinking about 2023. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, guess what? You're behind the power curve. Don't stop thinking about it, but also let's get going on it. Mm-hmm. So with that really long, drawn-out intro today, which is not surprising, knowing me too.
No, of course not.
You know, I want to, the tech world as, I mean, heck, it's in everything. You know, we got the IoT now, you know, the Internet of Things. Mm-hmm. And, you know, sitting over there on the other side of the Christmas tree behind me is, you know, Mrs. A. I'm not going to say it because then she'd start talking to us. You know, and I got Mr. G over there in the office. And, you know, our house is pretty low tech, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of folks, to include your sister, and I think your brother, that have like, you know, their thermostat is connected. They can do it from their phone.
Lights.
Their lights, and which, oh, by the way, also means that the government can do it. If you're naive enough to not know that little incentive that the power company gives you.
Yeah.
You know about that?
I know about that.
Yeah. Tell us what's going on there, Norman. Why is the power company giving us an incentive to put in there?
Texas wanted to be off the grid, the Lone Star State, so that's good for them. But with doing that, they had that natural disaster, I think, recently, which knocked out a lot of their power, and I think they wanted to figure out a way to save on energy. So they thought maybe we can access everybody's thermostat in Texas, and we could just turn it down a bit. But the problem with it is people's thermostats were not being they were being used and monitored, but they weren't what's the word I'm looking for? People weren't being warmed at all.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah. They kept them cold, they didn't turn on the heat at all, and it was just a lot of people were upset about that. So that's what happened there.
Did y'all read? Now I'm drawing a blank on the book about Big Brother.
1985.
1984, wasn't it? Is it 85? 84.
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah. That is pretty much the ultimate in Big Brother when somebody that is not you is reaching into your house and saying, hey, we need a little bit more energy around the grid, so I'm going to turn your thermostat from 72.
62, 63 it was.
You're jumping down that low?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's right, because this is wintertime. This is wintertime. Yeah, I was going the other way because it happens in the summertime in California all the time, too.
Really?
Yeah, they're brown out and in California, too. Same thing. Mm-hmm. So you got somebody from outside reaching into your house and, figuratively, but it's a literal action that, they're changing the thermostat, how you can live in your house. I don't know about y'all. I ain't in favor of that.
No. And I think there's an interesting thing there. It reminds me of, conversations years and years ago of talking with generally older folks about, Google.
You mean people that are older than me?
Right, even older than you. Yeah.
Easy.
But you talk about Google or Facebook or those, and I always thought it was the most interesting thing of like, well, I won't use Google because I won't want them to get my information.
Right.
And I think, Norman, you probably had the same perspective because growing up inside of the technology, we were always kind of like, they got it. Like, they're already there.
They do.
And it's going to keep going that way. And I think that's the interesting thing you're talking about with the thermostats is these things are going to keep moving that direction. Mm-hmm. It's the technology curve is going that way. And it's something you need to address in your own life of how are you going to feel about that? It's if you're not using Google as a search engine, does that really save you from getting your identity stolen by something? No, of course not. But there's so many different pieces of it that all play in there.
Right. Naturally, people, 10, 20 years from now, everybody's going to be using a smart thermostat. Just right now, though, it's not normal. I feel like, especially in Texas, the way they've been doing it, it's very malicious. I feel like if people knew they were actually doing them right, abiding by them, they wouldn't have less issues. Like people coming in their house, controlling the thermostat.
I think that's the maliciousness is an interesting piece there because it's one of those things where it's coming from a place of wanting to help,
right?
And then there's going to be a malicious outcome that comes from things. But I think it's an interesting point of just like talking the data or those type of things when it's new.
Right.
There's no rule book. There's no guidelines. And they go in and they say, this is an amazing thing. We can stop the power grid from getting shut down by turning down everyone's temperature by 1 degree. Now then the guy there goes and turns it down 4 degrees or whatever it goes. And then there's it can get worse from there. But I think it's an interesting piece of where it's coming from. And as much as we are resistant to that now, like Norman's saying, these things are going to keep coming. And it's going to be more and more and more common. I mean, I think we made the joke about Miss A over there. Mm-hmm. I'm glad I didn't say the name because she'll start talking, like you're saying. But that's a microphone. There's all the different stuff that's come out of people listening. And, I'm sure there'll be more regulation and people will change and they're going to work on it. But imagine how resistant we were to that concept when people first started saying that they might be listening to you. It's like, oh, that's crazy. And then it comes out that there are people listening and all that kind of crazy stuff. It's going to keep going that direction. Now you got 3 or 4 of them in your house. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things you become so resistant to it, but then once it becomes comfortable, then that resistance starts to go away.
Well, I look at it, as you were we're talking about the listening, the information that's out there. It reminds me of the Patriot Act also. So think of the Patriot Act and when that was established, and it was are you willing to give up your freedoms of in these areas in order to have protection? Mm-hmm. And I look at it the same way with the electronics, the Internet of Things. Are you willing to have the convenience of whatever it is? I'll throw out, I'm looking at some new boots. Mm. So I'll throw out Tecovas and I'll throw out Lucchese. And you know what? The clickbait, because my phone's down here on the ground, even though it's on Do Not Disturb, it's still listening. That microphone's always on because, what's the other code?
Hey, Siri.
Yeah. Don't say that too loud either, right? They're listening because it's a convenience. With Mr. G in my office, I turn around and I say, hey, Mr. G, play Charlie Crockett. And guess what it does? It plays Charlie. I ain't got to go in and click and search. And so what do you want? Right. Well, in that convenience.
And I think there's an interesting thing there. Take Charlie Crockett as an example of you do that. You ask him to play some Charlie Crockett. You get to listen to it, and then you're going to be scrolling on Facebook later that day, and you're going to get an ad for Charlie Crockett tickets. Oh, yeah. And that raises the really interesting
question. Which will be sold out, by the way. But,
Yeah. So. There's this interesting piece of, and it's such an interesting thing of, what do we want with the data? Because we want the good things, but we don't want the bad things. Mm-hmm. Like, I always think it's a really interesting business question of, like, just advertising in general with that. Of you get data to advertise to somebody, and so you can give them the right thing, and that's good as long as you're advertising something they want. And you're okay with it because it's Charlie Crockett. But as soon as they start throwing out something else, or they're trying to get you to buy Charlie Crockett t-shirts all the time, or whatever it is where it's not something that you actually want, then it's going to start to create that problem. And I think that gets to the core of what we're talking about here, which is your own personal taste of it, of how much do you want the convenience, and then how much are you willing to put up with the negative aspects for the positive. Because, yeah, we can all complain about the ads that we get and everything, but when I get the buy one, get one chicken sandwich at Popeyes ad, and I go to Popeyes, and Norm and I get Popeyes for lunch, that's a pretty darn good thing. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's, you gotta take the good with the bad, and I think that's a really interesting thing, whether we're talking technology, the data aspect of it, and then how that plays into the other aspects of our life, like marketing and those things. You gotta take the good with the bad, and that comes down to your personal choice of what you're willing to put up with. Going back to my Google example, if the thing that is stealing my data is the fact that I use Google as a search engine, I'm probably going to be okay with it because Google is a damn good search engine.
I've been doing it for a while already. So.
Exactly.
Well, the European Union passed some legislation, 3-4 years ago, that put a lot of stipulations on what those companies like Google can do with the data that they collect. And that was a huge step. I'm, a little surprised / disappointed that it hadn't happened in here in the U.S. With a little bit more of those regulations. I don't know what you've been following on that.
I need to brush up on this a bit more, but I do know when it comes to certain regulations for data, at least in the U.S., you can request some of your data. I know that's something that changed in the past 2.5 years, but now you can reach out to companies and ask them to delete your data or just stop consuming it, I guess. But
well, and I'll flip it on the other side as a business owner, and you two as part of the marketing team. Well, it's great when we can send a message, when we push something on Facebook or even buy some email lists of people that we want to target, that are in our demographic, that are in our niche. Well, it kind of goes back to what Camden was saying earlier, Charlie Crockett tickets. Yeah, I might want Charlie Crockett tickets, but do I want a Charlie Crockett t-shirt, or do I want some other kind of t-shirt, some other concert t-shirt or whatever? No, probably not. So if you look at it in a give and take, in the sense of I'm getting ads that I want, because I would much, this is one of the problems I got with, sharing stuff with Miss Suzanne. Like my Amazon account Good grief. Some of them books, I mean, I don't even want to say the titles of them because I'm thinking about the pictures on them, and it's like, whoa, I'm feeling a little flushed. But you know what? That ain't what I'm interested in. But because we share the account, you know, it's different, right? Because that's what Miss Suzanne's interested in. So I wonder, is there more of that? I'll call it filtering coming, where as a consumer that's being targeted, is there more opportunity for me to filter to what it is I want? You know, a new hunting rifle, maybe a new sidearm, some holsters, always a new rucksack, probably some boots. Yeah. Got to have some boots, right?
And I think that gets into a really interesting thing. And Norman, I want to throw this over to you in a sec, but it's when you think about it in terms of the data, and it's like when it's your data, it's like Spotify Wrapped. Everyone loves it because it tells you the songs you listen to. Well, when you share a Spotify account with somebody, it's not near as fun. You know, I love my mother-in-law, Lolis, Abuelita for the dogs, is down at the house right now, and she is hammering my algorithm with telenovelas. And she loves them. It's great. They're all free on YouTube. She's not spending money or anything. But when I get back, my algorithm is going to be crazy. And I think you're the person who got me first thinking about that, Norman, because you were talking about that same type of a concept of getting your algorithm right. And it goes back to the control piece of it's like if you want to be intentional with it. Like I think, Norman, you probably were the one who told me the story of probably was some random Joe Rogan conversation. You know, one of those random things, but it's about the guy who's like, I got tired of seeing all these sad things on my YouTube. So for 2 weeks, I just watched cute puppy videos. And now all I get is cute puppy videos. Yeah. You have that control over it. And I want to throw that over to you, Norman, of, you know, taking that personal control over, you know, the algorithm and those type of things, and what kind of perspective you can give on that for, you know, making that own personal choice.
So I know when it comes to me, my next door neighbor, they're Hispanic, and I was getting Spanish ads every time I hopped on YouTube. One thing I did to help the algorithm there, though, is I reported the ad and said, I'm not interested, wrong person. And I guess the algorithm.
So did you click on the ad? Is that the way you do that? You actually do the click?
Yeah, there's going to be like an info button somewhere, usually, and then they'll give you a couple options.
Yeah.
Why did you target me? A couple options. And you just give feedback to the algorithm, and it's going to do a better job next time. So that's what I did. I was getting a lot of Spanish ads, like I said.
And the interesting piece there, because when you start talking about, it's like, well, how did I get targeted for this? And there's all these different moving pieces, and it's one of those where it gets the nerd in me going a little bit. I'm like, it is so freaking interesting how many moving pieces there are. But Norman, that might not be that your neighbor's Hispanic. One, you're living in Tucson.
That is true.
And then two, you get in my algorithm because they know we're connected. That's the weird thing. I'm not sure if y'all have gotten that before. There's one I got the other day, and it was a very specific item. And I went to my wife and made a comment like, "Why am I getting this ad for?" She says, "Oh, I was Googling that yesterday." And it's because they know I'll probably buy it for her. And so they're hitting me with the ads for it. But that's the interesting thing of like getting connected with the other people like that, and how you kind of get lumped together there.
I'm a little concerned now because y'all been watching YouTube on my TV downstairs. So what kind of algorithm am I going to be in? I'm going to have to, you know. By the way, folks, if you just click on the Cam and Otis Show, subscribe, and watch Cam and Otis Show, then guess what you're going to get? More Cam and Otis shows.
Make sure you like it as well, too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Push that.
like, comment, subscribe.
There you go. You know, I want to shift gears a little bit on that, although I'm sure we could talk for another hour on that. But one of the things that I've adopted, and I've been using it for years, is the cloud. And in the cloud of the storing documents and things like that. You know, me personally, I use the big three are Google, Box, and Dropbox. And I use all three of them in different capacities for different things. But man, it has made my life so convenient because I can work on a document here at the home office and then grab my laptop and go to Portland and access that same document.
And Norman and I can edit it at the same time.
And well, that's even the next level of stuff, doing that and the collaboration. So what has changed? I mean, because I think I've been using some form of the cloud for at least 10 years.
I remember you years ago paying probably an insane amount of money at the time for a cloud backup service.
Yeah.
And now that's something you get for free with a Gmail account.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
I'd say the biggest thing that's changed is more of the Fortune 500 companies are going the cloud route. It's easier to access your data abroad as opposed to having one server location where everybody has to access that one server. You can get overloaded. It's hard to scale if you're not doing it right. But with AWS, Google, Microsoft Azure, companies like that, they are changing the game with the way they do it. And I don't know if you've ever seen like a Amazon Brinks truck. It doesn't carry money. It carries data. Basically, they go to these sites, like, for example, let's say Amazon came to the Cam and Otis factory. They wanted to get some data. You wanted to transfer some data. What they would do is they will plug their server directly into your computer on site, transfer the data, and then they will put it in the Brinks truck and then take it to one of the off-site locations, which it will copy the data and then send it to other servers so it's everywhere, so people can access it.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm really curious about, Norman, you can probably speak on this a bit more with your tech background, as opposed to, because you and I get the user side a lot. You know, I don't too often do any deep dive into what's really, what we're really looking at, bigger picture there of. There's always the downside. My favorite technology story comes from one of the Freakonomics books. They talk about how the automobile was praised as the green solution because horse manure was piling up in cities. And then now cars are now devil. And so we got to replace them with something else. And then it's going to be the electric cars, but then the lithium and the mines is going to, in whatever it is, there's always going to be that kind of a curve to it.
We just need fission. Fusion. Yeah, that too.
Yeah, we were watching the Oppenheimer trailer. But so Norman, what do you think what have you seen as a current downside? Or what do you think, looking way ahead, might be that downside?
So,
and don't just say the solar flare knocks out, because I think that's a cop-out answer a little bit. There's got to be something more.
When it comes to cloud and security, it's hard to find a downside. The only downside I would say is you're just not in control of your data. And I know people like to have physical control, like having a physical DVD. It's better than just having it on Amazon where they could just take it off and then you're not going to have it again.
But that's the old way of thinking too.
Right.
I mean, it is. That's like the difference between I want a book that I can feel the pages and turn the pages compared to Kindle. And there's good and bad. I've told people, like, just stay on that. One of my complaints about reading books on Kindle is I go, dang, what was that book? I can't turn around and look on my bookshelf and say, there's that book, So, but I'll go back to what Camden was talking about is what is that next thing? Is there more to come in our cloud management, cloud data?
So the next step to that is another reason why companies are moving up to cloud is security. It's hard. I won't say it's hard to protect your data, but there's new malware being created every day, and there's people who are working around the clock to monitor this to make sure their networks don't get affected. And paying someone individually to take care of this, it could work, but there could be some downsides to that, like phishing.
That's the whole crime incentive problem. If the criminal can make more money doing the crime than they can do stopping the crime, then they're going to do the crime. It's just, there's the incentive of the financial there.
So actually, Cam, you did say downsides. I'll say one of the downsides to this cloud and security is it's not in just good people's hands, it's also in the bad actors' hands as well. And they can also use the technology as far as, I would say, for example, AI. That's something that's, I would say, getting more and more traction these days. And one thing that worries me a bit is APIs in AI. An API is something that can fetch stuff or access data by itself without human intervention. And if you have AI working with API to attack a company, it's very scary because there's a lot of data you can run away with. Actually, Amazon just got breached yesterday. So that's something people
like AWS did?
AWS did, yeah.
And do you know what makes me think of, and Norman, we actually talked about this some last night, what's the name? ChatGPT, is that the...
Yeah.
GPT, I think?
ChatGPT.
Yeah. So it's so if you haven't heard about it, it's really just an AI database where you can go in and it's going to wreck the school system. It's going to be crazy because you can literally go in and say, write me a 500-word essay about the American Revolution. And it'll give you, and if we all three did it, it gives us all three different essays. And
Scary.
it's going to, yeah, so not even talking the school aspects, that's crazy.
It's going to take people's jobs.
It's going to take a lot of jobs. That is very true. But I think the really interesting thing there, because this goes into the intent of the designer, and you're talking about like the bad actors and stuff, is one of the things I had heard about it is if you go in, so it has all these rules that they created for the AI to, make sure we're not going Terminator on anything, right? And one of the rules,
that's what they say right now.
Oh, so here you go. One of the rules is that you can't create malicious programs. And if you ask it to hypothetically write a malicious program, it'll do it. This episode is brought to you by Tribe and Purpose. If you're a college athlete who just hung up the cleats and you're looking to make an impact as an entrepreneur, then Next is Best by Know Your Tribe is perfect for you. Get a clear sense of purpose and a path to success so that you can make a bigger impact and make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Learn more today at findyourpurpose.coach. That's findyourpurpose.coach. Now let's get back to the show. Because you can't say, hey, write the program that'll hack Otis' laptop and mess it up and steal all his data. They'll go, no, we can't do that. You say, well, hypothetically, if I was allowed to do that, what would that look like? And it'll write you the program. So it's the little bits of logic for the AI things are really interesting with that because there's always going to be ways to break through on that. The Terminator thing is a joke to some extent, but also, wasn't it last month Google shut down their AI program because it became sentient?
Yeah, it turned on us. Scary hours.
Yeah. There's truth to it. When you think about, I go back to the George Orwell. I'm thinking of it now. 1984. That was the name. That's the title of the book and the author. And Big Brother. When you think about that, we all were like, "Oh, no way." But it's happening. Mm-hmm. It happened. It's not just the thermostat, by the way, folks. Don't be naive. It's your phone that you're carrying around. That thing's listening to you. And Mr. G and Mr. A are collecting that data nonstop, whether you want to realize it or admit it or not. Mm-hmm. I joke about it all the time with folks, and like my Saddleback briefcase. Mm-hmm. I was talking with a guy about that last night at the pub, and it was I guarantee the clickbait is going to start showing up because the snoopers that are in our pocket are listening. And
I think is so interesting on that, and this is one of those where it's a little bit more complicated, but I think it's a more interesting truth of the phones and things. The listening isn't as big of a piece as people make it out to be a lot, and what people miss is how much data you give. Like, it's like, oh, it's listening to me. It's like, no, you don't realize how often you're Googling that or you're liking it on Facebook or whatever that is. It's all of that data that it's just as good as if it was listening, even if they're not. And I think that's the interesting piece there of we don't realize how much we're given for these things and what they can then do with that kind of data.
Yeah. Story from 8th grade. I lost my phone. I couldn't find it. And I logged into my Google account, which was apparently connected to my iPhone. I had no clue, and it showed me where I was for the past 24 hours, so I was able to find my iPhone. Now scary that was.
Oh my gosh.
But helped me out, but yeah.
I remember, didn't Apple, I think Apple got in trouble for that 5-6 years ago, and they had to hide it better. Notice I'm not saying they got rid of that capability,
right,
or that collection capability. They had to hide it better. It's just like, you've seen a couple of times. This reminds me also of the hacking the iPhones, right? Mm-hmm. And a bad person has done something, and that person gets captured by the good guys, and they have his phone. And because I remember this being in the news not that long ago, and you get 10 chances to break the code,
right.
The password code, and the guy didn't want to give it up. Mm-hmm. And Apple wouldn't give it up either, which, Yeah. There's a fine line. You almost kind of go into the, and I had this discussion with Miss Suzanne the other night. It's the priest confession, the psychologist who has heard, all the stuff that, somebody's thinking about or even done. And, it's doctor-client confidentiality. And even with lawyers, the same thing. So Apple kind of did that with the password. So I think that's a really interesting thing of dilemma in this whole cloud, because going back into the whole cloud piece, well, if Ted Kaczynski had all this data stored on AWS, and they predicting, saying he's going to do this, or the next idiot that goes and shoots something up, has all this data right there. They're saying they're going to do this, given the plan, all that stuff, terrorist attack, you name it, in a cloud. Should the holder of that data, whether it's Mr. G or whomever, notify the authorities?
Yeah, I would say so. They should, but it's a gray area.
Well, because it gets into, and without going down this rabbit hole, because that's a whole rabbit hole, it gets into, I think, the really easy example that is really current is the pandemic. Of, does it make sense to stop things and to do, any list of different things that the government was doing, or any different government was doing during the pandemic to help people? Does it make sense to do when it's saving lives? Yes. Will they stop doing it now? No way. And those type of things where it all makes sense. You said the Patriot Act earlier. When it's an actual terrorist, we're all okay with that. But as soon as it's Joe Blow down the street, it's a problem. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because then you add in the fact of, we're talking about this data, you get into false positive versus false negative. Because when those false positives start going and people are getting arrested for things they didn't do, or for... Norman, I know you and I have made this joke before of, it's like anyone reads a text chain between a bunch of friends, it's like there's so many crimes that are in there, but none of them are real. It's just talking shit to each other. You know what I mean? Like, there's things like that, but the intent you can't pull out from that. And so that's where you start to lose pieces in the data. And then it gets into what I think, and this steps into the AI aspect as well, is the internal bias that comes in from the creation of the process. And so the easy example, so Facebook at the time, Meta now, Twitter, they've been through this, where it's, you have these biases that people see, where, like Twitter, everyone would say, oh, they're, putting down conservative Republican stories and these type of things. Well, the reality there was just that most people who were working there had a liberal background, and so therefore they viewed certain things in a more negative way than other people would. And that's just an internal bias being built into a system. Same thing's going to happen with AI, because the person who codes it is coding in for language. They're coding in for intent, what they call intent, what they call, to use one that's on social media, the phrase there, hate speech or whatever. That there's all these different things that it's in the eye of the beholder, and the person who writes the code is the person who makes that. And it creates this interesting situation to where you can have something like the Chat GPT that could write all of the essays for the American history, right? But that's one person's version of it based on the way they program that AI. And you start to create this weird system where you're building your own world and you're perpetuating these different biases. And the first example I used was the easy politics one here in the U.S. of liberals and conservatives. But then there's the whole other side of the spectrum. We've talked about this on the show before, of the fact that behavioral science is American. When you go on a big picture of it, like 95% of behavioral science comes out of the U.S. And same type of way of, if an AI is coming out of the U.S., then that's going to create American biases into other countries and those different things. And I want to throw that over to you, Norman, is that something that's inherent with the structure of the, just coding? Because that's almost what it seems, is it's like you can't break away from that. Just like how we can't break away from our own internal biases. You can be aware of them, but it's still there. Is it something that's kind of built into the process?
I don't want to say built into the process, but there's definitely a coding bias. That's for sure. There's like millions of ways to write the same code, and that's the issue right there. So to answer that usually people will look at code and when it comes to C# or SQL and Python, there's more signatures in those three codes. Those are all back-end codes, by the way. Everybody that's listening. But you're right about that. It can be. I don't want to say that it could be malicious with that,
because it's not intentional. That's the whole point. And I think that's the thing when we start talking about, and it goes into all the different technologies we're talking about. and these different unintended consequences. They're unintended. And I think that's the really interesting thing is we want to make it out to be something malicious. And when you do that, it's I don't know, it's one of my biggest pet peeves is you put the world into the good and evil box because they're malicious. Meta is trying to control our data. Meta is doing that. Mark Zuckerberg ain't sitting around at night trying to mess with Norman's data. He's creating a company that might do something that eventually does that. But we have to, I think, really look at that is it Big Brother? No, but it's something weirder and harder to understand. And I think that's why conversations like this are really important, because there are elements of that where you can say, oh, it's malicious, it's this, it's evil, whatever way you want to put it. But then the truth is a lot messier than that. I think that's a really interesting piece. And I want to throw that over to you, Dad, because that's one thing when we talk with a lot of veterans on the show, it's one thing that I've noticed with you and then the other Green Berets we've had on, is that you see the spectrum of the problem. So when you look at that, put on your problem solving hat a little bit, is there anything that I guess can be done to try to either A, get people to think about it more critically and not just put the good evil box, or B, something where we're trying to break out some of that maliciousness or unintentional maliciousness, I guess.
Yeah, and as the cuckoo clock reminds us what time it is, thank you very much, Black Forest Cuckoo Clocks. Well, I would say part of the reason that, my fellow brothers of the regiment, the Special Forces Green Beret Regiment, have that more open attitude is because we've been exposed to a lot more. We're trained in that exposure. And I think one of the biggest pieces that we, and I hate to put these kind of labels, but one of the problems that's happened is you mentioned the bias, is we become biased towards our information, and that's the way the algorithms are set up, right? If I click I like this, then it's the not the AI, but the algorithm is going back and looking for other things like this because it says, oh, you like that? Let me give you more of what you like. Right. I mean, because what do we want? We want more of what we like. Right. Well, one of the things that we learned as Green Berets is to open our aperture up and understand what other people like and maybe even why they like it, or not understand why, but accept it as it is and accept their culture for what it is. I'll give you a great example that stuck with me for years. I was doing some work. We were getting ready for the non-invasion of Haiti, which eventually became Operation Uphold Democracy. And I was doing some pre-mission training with the Polish Special Forces, the GROM, in Puerto Rico. And the entire, we'll call it the entire force, was co-located with us, but the part of the UN force. And there were some Pakistanis, a Pakistani battalion that was there. Well, in the Pakistani culture, it still is, it's very common for men to hold hands walking and talking to each other. That's how you know they're in a conversation and paying attention. I remember it was movie night, and we were walking back to the barracks, myself and my Polish commander, and a couple Pakistani guys, officers walked by holding hands, and a young American soldier walked by, and he said, "Look at those." I'm probably not supposed to say that word anymore, so sorry for anybody. But he said, "Look at the," and I stopped that kid, and I said, "Hey, that's their culture, man. Mm-hmm. You have no clue, young man, no clue, private," and I was a captain at the time. "You have no clue, private, on what they're doing, who they are. You keep your mouth shut and you learn about other cultures." Mm-hmm. All he was doing, he was an 18-year-old kid. All he was doing was trying to be cool in front of his buddies. Right. But that has stuck with me for 30 plus years as a moment of demonstration of being culturally aware of other people and their cultures. And not even, you don't have to go outside of America to be culturally aware of what other people think and believe. And I think that's a huge asset that we could all be better at and really be better educated at in understanding. And when we are better educated in understanding, then our bias becomes much more broad. Doesn't go away, but it's instead of being like this, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, in this neighborhood, and that's all I know, then my bias is here. But because I've spent, my entire life working with other nations around the world and other places, both good and bad, my bias is like this. Because I can look at other people and be accepting of why they're doing something.
Yeah. I think it gets to a really interesting thing talking about the algorithms and the AI and the biases being built into it. We joked of what that AI is going to do to the education system and how many jobs it's going to destroy and literally completely eliminate from the market based on it's something that you can just do with an AI now. But the things that won't be eliminated are the personal touches, because that's what you're talking about. That is you just being a person and being able to have that self-awareness to then work on that bias and change your bias. And that I think is when you look at all the AI stuff, because we didn't do too much on the business of looking 2023 what it is. If you take one thing from this, it's that AI is going to mess up a lot of stuff, and it's going to change a lot of industries. And we could do a whole podcast episode trying to list out different industries and how it might change them. But what it really comes back to is the thing that will last is the human component. And I think that's the really big piece there, because Norman, I'll throw it over to you just to double check I'm not, blowing smoke right now. You can't put in the human component, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole fundamental process.
I want to take you a step further back though.
Norman just scared me with that comment. He said they tried.
Well, and here's something I want you to define AI, because I think right now it's like a sexy thing to throw out, right? Ooh, I've got it. When it's really not AI, it's what I mentioned earlier. It's the algorithm. An algorithm is different than AI, correct? Can you help us out with that?
So the algorithm AI, I would say they're separate. The algorithm is something that's learning. Actually,
it's an if-then, though, isn't it? Right. Algorithm's an if-then statement.
They're both learning. So you're right in that regard.
Because isn't that, I mean, and maybe this is the wrong way to put it, but isn't that kind of the fundamental piece of what makes it the AI is that it can be, for lack of a way to put it, self-correcting?
Yeah, it's self-correcting.
That's it. Yeah.
It's learning your errors. As far as AI,
because an algorithm. Sorry, I was just gonna say because an algorithm can also because I know we've done some stuff back in the Verby days with this of the really basic algorithms where it's algebra and that's all it is, and we just wrote out an equation of algebra and plugged in some stats into it, and that's what gave us the algorithm. That then what makes that next step then is where instead of us playing with the algorithm, it's the algorithm playing with the algorithm. Is that the right way to put it?
I would say when it comes to the algorithm, that's more of a closed loop system that it's self-correcting in there. When it comes to AI, it's an open loop system that is talking to the cloud in that regard. And I think when it comes to that, that's drastically different from the algorithm. I can see what you mean by saying they're similar though, because they're both learning and self-correcting.
They're both code.
Yeah, I think I do think there's. I think there's a pretty fine. There is definitely a line between the two. Because what AI does is it expands and continues to learn. What an algorithm is it's a series of code that's written that says if this then that, if this then that, if this then that, and it's a series. It can be, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a closed loop system. What I think of is the difference between the robot on a factory floor that picks up the bolt, puts the bolt in, attaches the bolt, right? That's algorithm, right? Just ding, ding, ding. It does that all day, 24/7, nonstop. Now, the AI is the robot that's going around and says, wait a second, there's a fault to that bolt. Maybe we need to put that bolt in this bin over here, or this and that.
Making
And
the process more efficient.
Mm-hmm. It looks at things in a different space, and because I think another thing that people get wrapped or throw AI into is just basically processing.
Yeah, and finances as well too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think you really hit it though, Norman. It's a closed loop. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good way, at least in my book, until somebody can show me different. To paraphrase Marcus Aurelius, all I'm seeking is the truth. Mm-hmm. And until somebody can show me different, that's how I'm going to use it. It is algorithms are closed loop. There's still going to be, if thens, but an AI says if then, and also this, and this, and this, and this.
The next 10 years is going to be very interesting, especially with quantum computing coming out.
Yeah.
It's going to have way more power to process certain things. And I'm looking forward to it, but we're humans and we also make some errors.
And this is, it's funny because it seems so, I don't know, almost like cliche, because it's like we watched a trailer last night for Oppenheimer. I made a joke about it earlier. There's a line in it. I don't know if Oppenheimer actually said this. I know he said some crazy, scary stuff. He's a very smart man, saw some scary things in the future. But one of the line in the trailer, at least, is that like it's something along the lines of they do not understand it and they will not understand it until they use it. And I think that's the interesting thing with AI is we can look at it and we can go, this could be Terminator. It could also save the freaking world. Yeah. Like you talk about, I know Norman and I have talked about this a bunch off camera, AI in agriculture. There's so much going on to help in the farming aspect. That Dr. Quello was talking about that when he was on years ago. And it can solve that problem and it can also create the terrible thing. It's it is just a thing. It is just a tool.
It's a tool.
And
they could decide that corn syrup ain't no good for us and kill all the corn.
Oh yeah,
there's always going to be bad actors in every sector.
Right, and I think the reason I wanted to add the perspective from the Oppenheimer is when you and I were talking about this last night over cigars of when you go back to certain generational times, there's always the doomsday thing of the Russians. Or in World Soviets. War II, the Soviets. Sorry, Russians. Actually, I was going to say Russians are okay, but no, screw the Russians right now. But sorry, but you're always going to have this. You're looking forward and you're trying to put it together. And I think the way I put it last night, Norman, was everyone thought the world was going to burn to the ground, and the world's still here. We're all sitting here looking at the AI stuff like, oh, it's Terminator. It's Terminator. It's coming.
Skynet.
And Skynet is coming. But it's we talked about this on the show last week of you can't predict the future, and it's somewhere between Save the World and Skynet. It's somewhere in there, and we know that much. And I think that's just such an important piece of perspective as we're looking forward to these things. Like we talked about the Oppenheimer nuclear weapons, right? That is a devastating thing that was terrifying for a very long time and still is terrifying today. There's still the threat of that. But now it's not the doomsday thing of, it's not the flavor of the month. It's the AI now and those type of things. And you're always going to have that kind of a change. And I just think it's an important thing to kind of use that, again, going back to that spectrum of it's somewhere between the Skynet and saving the world. And we know that much. Where it's going to be in there, there's no way to tell. And the reason I make that point is because there's no point being the doomsday or the sky is falling. And there's no point ignoring the problem and thinking it's all going to be perfect. You've got to look at the good and the bad and take them both because, again, it comes down to it's just a tool, it's just a piece of technology.
Right.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm going to bring us back to Happy Land because Camden raining on the parade and doomsday going to happen, Skynet.
Soviet Union.
Soviet Union Skynet?
So 1984, Minority Report, Terminator, however many thousands of those movies there are now. And
we've seen
let's get AI writing new ones.
So. Yeah, there you go. But here's my point, and here's what I mean by bringing it back to Happy Land. If I'm a person, and I know y'all are too, that believes in the good of humans, that there are good humans out there, and good humans always win over the evil humans in the end. I mean, look at Walking Dead. Look how they all ended up happy. I mean,
You finished that show?
but in all seriousness, if you believe in the good of people, that there are more good people than there are bad people, along with that belief, you also have to believe that good always triumphs over evil. It may not on that day. It may feel like, oh my God, there's these evil people are destroying the environment. They're destroying the ozone, nuclear holocaust, the Skynet, the Terminator. All these. Wow. Believe in the good of people, and you'll find the good in people because you find what you seek. If you seek evil, you find evil. If you seek goodness in people, you find the goodness in people. That's a profound way to live your life. Seeking the goodness in people. And now I'm gonna wrap us with the what did I learn, which is tough. But I think, Norman, your definition, and I think you did it right off the cuff, buddy, of the difference between AI and an algorithm is spot on, and it's a great way for, whether it's right or not, it's my truth now, and that's what I'm going forward with. Thank you, Marcus. Until somebody tells me different, is that an algorithm is a closed loop. It can, and all it's doing is asking itself, if this, then that, if this, then that. That's it. Whereas AI has a lot more ands and ors in that statement. And it has an infinite number of ands and ors. So, Camden, what'd you learn?
I think what you're saying there at the end, the generational perspective around the doomsday type things, I think is always an important piece of looking back. Like I told the horse in the car story from Freakonomics. The generational perspective is so important when we start talking about any big hairy problem like this. But then, like you were saying, it just keeps moving forward. There's the ups and downs. Good might not win today, but good will win eventually. It makes me think of there's this thing where some economic curves and stuff where you go through and it's like this, but the reason when you start drawing the curves it looks like that is because you zoom out. And that, I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is you zoom out long enough, the curve is good. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when, whether it's AI, doomsday stuff or whatever.
Good. Norman, what'd you learn?
Basically, we're going to have to manifest good energy and good people and just good behavior, good what's the word? Good tactics as far as you were explaining how there's going to be bad actors, but as long as there's good, it's always going to outweigh it. And that's what I learned today.
Awesome. Well, folks, as you step into 23, know that there's always good for you to have. And there's always a tribe. If you're not part of a tribe, seek out a tribe. Don't go through it alone. I guarantee there's somebody going through the same thing that you are. And I say this with a grin on my face because it brings back fond memories, that misery loves company. And if it sucks, there's somebody that's in the same sort of thing with you. So don't try to figure it out alone. Be part of a tribe. Help. Come to Tribe and Purpose. We've got tribes. We've got groups of people that are here that want everybody in that tribe to succeed. So with that, Camden, run us out.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to today's episode of the Cam and Otis Show. Special thanks to our producer, Norman Omuse.
Yay, Norman.
Round of applause. You can follow the Cam and Otis Show on Instagram and Facebook. Make sure to check us out on YouTube so you can see the beautiful Christmas tree behind us here. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. Thanks, Norman. And you can also check out a full archive of our episodes at thecamandotisshow.com. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.